Hello, it's Carly here from Upgraded Leadership. In this video, I want to give an overview of some of the core fundamentals of leadership that over time I'm going to be unpacking a whole lot more with future content. So the fundamentals that I want to explore today are about vision, and let's maybe add some values to that as well, some nice V words, about sense making, about perspective taking, and about agreement making. So I'm going to go through these one at a time and unpack them a little bit. So the first one, vision. Well, when we're talking about leadership, I think we're generally talking about wanting to create some kind of future that we want to see. We want to create some values for our customers. We want to create a beautiful life for our family. We want to create a good set of habits for ourselves. Leadership also applies to self. And having a compelling vision is so key to that. Like, what is it that inspires us? What is it that moves us and motivates us and has us want to take action towards something? And this is, I think, such a fundamental aspect of leadership that is actually really overlooked a whole lot. Having worked in a lot of organizations and with a lot of people, often there is some sense of vision, but it's not particularly well connected to. It's not something that's really alive for people and constantly come back to. And so, I think actually this is probably the most fundamental aspect of leadership, and something that I'm going to really advocate for a lot as I keep sharing content. And part of creating a vision really is about making it something that we can imagine clearly. It's something that we can see what it might look like. It might look like for the people that we want to create value for. It might look like for our family, for ourselves. And ideally, we can imagine it with multiple senses. We can taste it and we can hear it. It's something that is alive for us, that keeps pulling us forward towards that vision. And the example that I always love to kind of connect with here is example of putting a man on the moon by the end of the decade. And that was like such a simple statement, as in it didn't take many words to make, but it really compelled a whole lot of activity, and it was really easy to visualize. It was something that really kind of captured the imagination of the whole world, really. So I think a vision that has that level of concreteness, we can actually really clearly visualize it and inspires us, is really, really important. Now, this whole territory of vision, people tend to talk about a whole lot of different stuff. We can talk about purpose or mission, and there's a lot of kind of distinctions we can make in this territory, and over time I'll probably start making more of these distinctions. But I do want to include values a little bit, because I think values is really important. When we talk about values, really we're asking ourselves the question, well, what do we value? What is of value to us? What is important to us? Which of course is very connected to vision, because we should be pursuing creating visions that are valuable, that are available to us for a reason. So asking that question, like why is this of value? And what's important to us about the things that we're imagining, I think is also really, really important. When we talk about values too, I think we're quite often not just talking about the what is the thing that we want to create. It's often also about the how. Well, how do we want to go about it? Like, what's the ways of working together that are valuable for us? And the typical stuff that you hear people talk about with values is things like integrity and collaboration and innovation, and all these things that I think are great. Ideally they're things that we can operationalize. Well, what does it look like? How are we behaving if we're living with integrity or we're collaborating well? But ideally, I think with our values, we're living into the question of what's important to us, and what's valuable in terms of how we act with each other, and kind of consistently asking ourselves that questions and being in inquiry together on that, I think is really, really important. So really, vision and values give us our compass. They give us our sense of direction. You know, how are we going to behave together? And where are we going together? You know, and this ultimately is the core of leadership, because what are we leading towards? You know, and leadership, where we're collaborating with others, we're in leadership with others, requires us to kind of go somewhere together, you know, and have a sense of mutual purpose. And it's constantly coming back to that sense of mutual purpose that will have us work effectively together. So that's the first one. So the second one is sense making. So when I talk about sense making, I'm really talking about, well, what's happening in reality? Like, how does reality actually work? You know, sense making is largely about understanding causality. Like, you know, I believe if we take this action, then we will get this result. You know, and so much of leadership is about making good sense of reality such that we can figure out the right action to take together. So once we have a vision of something that we want to create together, well, how do we make it happen? You know, and that's where sense making becomes really, really important. You know, and you know, I really believe in iterative approaches, having a strong agile background. So approaches that have us experiment, you know, and try things out, and based on what our sense making is, and then observe what happens, and then sense make based on what we saw happen, and then revise what our beliefs actually are, which is kind of really the scientific method, right? So like mapping our understanding of what creates what, you know, and understanding causality, I think is really, really important. So as leaders, we need to be able to sense make collectively. We need to be able to take perspective of different people and invite perspectives, which is the next one we're about to get into. And we need to then prioritize those perspectives. What do we think is more true, or how do we integrate the information from some of those perspectives and look at the data and kind of use that data to have evidence-based decision making. And prioritizing those perspectives then lets us actually, you know, kind of make choices. Well, someone believes this and someone else believes that, and based on the evidence and kind of my experience as a leader, I'm going to go this way, or maybe I'm going to go this way. This one seems more true, and I'm going to include some of this. And so sense making is really the basis of us making good decisions. You know, decision making is such a core aspect of leadership. So that's our first two. The third one, perspective taking. So we just got into this a little bit. Perspective taking is actually quite a vast territory. It's not actually that easy to really solidly take the perspective of others, because most of us listen based on our filters. We listen based on the beliefs that we have, the assumptions that we're operating out of, and so it can be actually very difficult to properly understand what another person is saying. So this kind of gets into listening and being able to listen with a lot of openness and have good inquiry, but to really understand what someone's saying. And a lot of the time that requires us to ask for examples to kind of ground what people are saying, because people often make statements that are generalizations, and it's hard to understand what they really mean without getting into specifics. So we need to kind of ask for examples of what they mean, or what it could look like, what they're saying, to ground their meaning making, and get specific. And it requires us to kind of let go, like I was saying, of our filters, so we can actually properly step into another person's point of view. And good listening is actually a mindfulness practice. It requires us to still our minds, and to have enough presence to like really step into this other person's point of view, and ideally we're not just listening with our ears, we're listening with our eyes, we're listening with our whole bodies. We can kind of start to actually attune to the other person, kind of feel what they're saying and where they're coming from, you know, and that requires us to practice this sense of mindfulness. Interestingly enough, perspective taking is a core distinction in developmental psychology, some branches of developmental psychology. I'm particularly thinking of Susan Cook-Greta's work here, and where she will look at how people develop based on the degree of perspective taking that they can get into. And that itself is a whole vast topic. But let's just say, as we mature as leaders, our ability to take more and more complex perspectives also matures. Like, I can start to go, well, what's the perspective that my boss might have of the perspective of the team, of the customer that we're trying to design the product for, where we start to kind of have lots of different perspectives on perspectives on perspectives. So perspective taking can get really, really sophisticated. So when we're talking about a team and sense making together, I really, as a leader, I want to be able to effectively elicit different people's perspectives. I want to be able to share my perspective in a way that it meets their perspective, so that they're going to be able to understand what I'm actually saying. So I mean, you need to be able to advocate effectively, and I need to be able to integrate all these perspectives. So how do we kind of bring everyone's sense making together and figure out the best course of action to take as part of that? And of course, including perspectives of individuals and having them feel heard and understood is a really key part of them feeling engaged. People, even if their perspective, let's say, isn't the primary one that a decision is based on, if they feel like they've been understood, they're still going to have a much higher likelihood of feeling okay with the course of action that's been taken. So, so a really important part of leadership, of course, is that inclusivity, that sense of kind of positively, constructively influencing people. And really that primarily comes down to understanding them and having them feel like they've been understood. So that's our third one. So far we've done vision and values, sense making and perspective taking. And our last one is agreements and making good agreements. So, once we've have a sense of vision, we've made good sense of, well, what we think we need to do to enact that vision. That includes taking in multiple perspectives and integrating those perspectives and making decisions based on them. Well, we need to kind of coordinate action out of that. And that largely comes down to us making effective agreements together. And this is, I think, another territory that isn't generally done that well. And really the crux of making good agreements is actually, in a way, similar to the vision stuff, is making it concrete. Like, I'm going to do X by Y time, because unless it's concrete, our agreements are kind of nebulous. Like, is the person going to do the thing, or they're not going to do the thing? Like, I've seen this a lot in business meetings, right? I'll take that thing, but it wasn't ever properly tracked, and there was no sense of when it was going to be done by. And when we actually look at the detail, the thing that they're going to do is kind of a bit vague. And what then happens is a lot of stuff just kind of starts to fall through the cracks, and this then leads to what I think of as actually really poor integrity, because integrity to me largely is, I'm going to do the thing that I said I was going to do. And collectively, if our integrity gets poor because we've got poor agreement making, well, then we kind of, it's like we leak a lot of energy. It's like we're kind of not actually in a coherent, solid way collectively taking action together. And then this leads to, I just think, so much wasted energy as part of execution. Because the other aspect of agreements is about eliciting agreements that are kind of real. Because I think, particularly in corporate cultures, a lot of the time agreements are kind of imposed upon people to some degree. The power dynamic is such that I tell you that you're going to do this thing, and if you don't agree to it, implicitly there's this assumption that you're going to get into trouble somehow, or possibly your job is going to be threatened. And what this then leads to is a lot of disengagement. And of course, disengagement is rife in organizational worlds. So a really important part of eliciting agreements is actually checking with the person if it's an agreement that they're able to make, that it feels good for them. Do they have the resources, the time, the energy to do the thing? Do they have the capability to do it? Do they think they are able to actually do what they're being asked to do, or they need support? So when we're eliciting agreements, it's super important that we're willing to actually negotiate the agreement, and we're willing to accept a no, so that we're actually being real about agreements, and people don't just say yes and then not do the thing. And that happens a lot because a yes isn't a real yes. They're actually, they're like, oh yeah, okay, and you can kind of just see it in the body language that there's this kind of dissonance. They're kind of saying yes because they think they have to, but they're not really going to do the thing, or they're going to do the thing half-heartedly, and it's not really going to create the result. So our ability to kind of actually elicit a no when it's actually there, or notice it and call out, like, oh, it seemed like you were a bit uncertain about that. Do you have some reservations? Let's talk through those reservations and see if we can maybe shift some of the agreement. And that might have us shifting when it's going to be done, shifting the way it's going to be done. Maybe it might include some other people, or some people who are going to support it, or if I'm in a stronger power position, then I might be supportive of the agreement, and so on. The final aspect of agreements that's really, really important, of course, is calling out broken agreements, which is what accountability is about. So holding people accountable to the agreements that they make. I can't do that unless the agreement is really concrete, because otherwise, did we actually agree to this thing, or was it maybe a little bit unclear? And holding people accountable is actually, I think, ultimately an empowering thing to do, because it asks people to take more responsibility, and responsibility, I think, is the basis of our power, our ability to respond, our response ability, our resourcefulness, So calling people out, when they didn't keep their agreements, I think is really, really important. Of course, respecting them as part of that is also important, and listening to, where they might have had some challenges, or, something unexpected came up, and an important part of holding people accountable here is also asking people to be good at renegotiating their agreements, because of course things that do come up that are unexpected, but we want people to let us know when that happens, so that the agreement can be renegotiated as soon as possible, so that we kind of collectively are still coordinating properly. So it's then all of this territory of good agreements that has us execute well, and coordinate well together. And then if we're doing the other pieces that I talked about, of actually making good sense of things and continually updating that sense making and continually checking back in with the vision that we have and what's important to us, well, that's then where we can actually create really, really amazing results together. And so all of these skills, come down to good relational skills, good thinking skills, and good imaginative skills, we can say. So there are some, I think, really powerful bases of good leadership. The final thing that I want to kind of just point to here is that, really interestingly, these skills of leadership can also be applied internally. So right now I'm running a course for my other business tribe with my wife, my lovely wife Prem, and we're running a course called Self-Leadership, which is based off of a psychotherapy called Internal Family Systems. And Internal Family Systems looks at an individual composed of parts. So on the inside we have different parts of ourselves. On one day I might kind of feel a particular way and think particular thoughts, and another day it might be different, or I might be different at home versus work. We all kind of have these different ways of being that we can think of as different parts of ourselves. So we have kind of like these internal collectives. So being a good leader to ourselves, all of these things apply. If I've got all these kind of different voices inside, and these different perspectives, well, how do I kind of create an integrated sense of self relating to all these parts inside of me. And all of it applies. What's the kind of vision that I have? What's important? And if I have these different parts of me, like one part is saying, we need to work harder, and another part is saying, whoa, we need more rest and more time just to kind of hang out with friends. How do I take the perspective of these different voices inside of me and kind of integrate these perspectives and make a decision that's gonna still kind of have me work towards my vision that's inclusive of these different voices. And so that, using this example, might look like, well, okay, we are going to work another hour now, but then we're going to, rest and watch a show that we really enjoy, or on the weekend, we're going to like just schedule some real fun time, so starting to include these different voices and perspectives in service of the larger vision totally works to leading ourselves as well, which I think is really cool. Well, I hope you've found value from this. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and opinions and perspectives and comments or questions. So yeah, please engage. Thanks for watching. Bye.